I'm the director of the Contra Casa and Solano Family Justice Centers, and I'm also on the executive committee for California Family Justice Network. And our Family Justice Network is a network of 27 operating family justice centers around the state of California. We work together, we learn together, and one of our really important initiatives this year is to learn about and think about how to make our family justice centers more father friendly. Knowing that we do our big time services and we work with a lot of women day in and day out, but we also need to think about the whole family and how to really help the whole family and how to help our community safer. So this is what we've been doing this learning series, and I'm really happy to be working with our friends at First Five Alameda. They are the ones who really put this learning series together. So I really appreciate them. And before I hand my mic over to them, I just want to share with you, I haven't seen you for 3 months because I was out on a sabbatical. So I would love to share my wisdom with you when we get a chance. But the one thing I want to share with you today is that it's important to have fun and joy in our lives and in our work here and now. So I really want to think about today. And yes, thank you. How to have fun, joy here and now. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you this morning. Now I hand it to Kevin.
Thanks, Hassan, and welcome back. We missed you. I really hope you had a lot of joy and fun during your time away. We've had some amazing trainings, some amazing workshops while you were out, and that is going to continue today. So really quick, my name is Kevin Vermont. I am the co-founder and program administrator for the Alameda County Fathers Corps. Our program is focused on creating a father-friendly system of care. A lot of times when we serve families and we serve parents and we support parents, a lot of times dads are left out of that equation. And so our job, our role as a program is to support organizations with being more intentional and effective with their father engagement and support. And we've been working with Jason Seals for a long time at this point. He's been part of the program for a while. We bring him in for trainings, not often enough, but as much as his calendar permits. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to turn it over to my brother, Jason Seals, to introduce himself and get started.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jason Seals of Jason Seals and Associates. My organization really focused on community healing, being mindful that there are different societal dynamics that causes harm. And we really believe in centering culture and centering, culture as a tool for wellness. And so today I'm here, humbled. I am a parent of 3 children, and I've been a co-parent. And I recognize the challenges that some people have faced in the co-parenting dynamic. And so today I just hope to offer some tools, some insight. There is so much to cover when you talk about co-parenting and healthy relationships, that my hope is to create a space where there's curiosity, there's an offering of tools, and I will share my PowerPoint with you all, hoping that there'll be some content there that will help you all's work. I want to preference and say that today's workshop is sectioned in multiple ways. So we have an emphasis on the service providers, you all. So there'll be some aspect of reflection. There's a section that is strictly for us to think about the children that are involved. And then there's an aspect where we think about parents and their experience and what's going on with them during this challenging process. And then there's a section that focuses on tools. What can we offer them to develop their capacity to be what I would consider child-centered parents? And I'm going to share my screen. And what I will hope is that as questions pop up for you all while I'm going to stop at every section. So those 4 sections that I identified before I go into a new section, I'll stop. If there's questions in the chat, it'll be an opportunity for us at that point to answer some of those questions. So we'll have 4 stops where we can, have some engagement around questions that have come up through the presentation. Can you all see the screen? Give thanks. One of the things that I'm always mindful of in doing this work is always starting with a land acknowledgement. I saw that some folks dropped in the chat where they're from. And so we want to acknowledge that we are on a lonely land and recognize the sacredness of this land. I think in doing land acknowledgements, it's a process of the healing that is needed from what is taking place on this land that has been horrific to our community. At the same token, I'm very mindful it's important to do life acknowledgements. If you think about the past 10 years, there's been a lot of lives lost. And I think it's always important to acknowledge the importance of those individuals that have lost their life in justice work. As a reminder, I just wanted to highlight what we'll be going over today. I think it's important for us to think about how do we think about co-parenting. So we'll explore some challenges and opportunities that are a part of co-parenting. And I'm using co-parenting as a larger contextual term, mindful that all of the parenting that we are engaging parents with isn't co-parenting, right? And we'll talk more about that. And then we'll talk about some strategies for effective co-parenting. And I think that's where we get to think about how do we be creative in this work? How do we be child-centered in this work? So just some agreements. I'm always very mindful that we're in a community, although we're virtual. If we was face to face, I would do the same exact thing. I think it's always important to put these here just in terms of agreements. I think in spaces like this, we tend to share personal thoughts. We share, personal experiences. And so always being thoughtful around confidentiality. I'm really big on appreciation for others as well as myself. And so hoping that in this learning space, as people share thoughts and ideas, there's an appreciation and that we recognize that we might have ideas that's different than other people, but those ideas are still welcome. I'm a big advocate for multiple ideas can coexist in these spaces, right? Being thoughtful about how do we add to this community of learning? So, as we want to share, how are we offering to this space that could be helpful or challenging? And I don't shy away from challenges. I think challenges can be growth, but I think there should be a mindful of what am I offering and what is my intent while offering that and what can be the possible impact, right? I think it's I've been in educational spaces for a number of years, learning spaces for a number of years. And, we always have our folks that feel very comfortable, sharing in large groups. And then we have folks that might not necessarily feel as comfortable. And so what I always tell people is that sometimes people process differently. Sometimes they need, a little room. And so if you notice that you're the talker and you always jump in, be mindful that other folks might also have, valuable information to share as well in this learning space. And then, I always think about if something is said that you don't like, always challenge people, sit with it, ask yourself why you might not like it. And then the other piece is if you want to share out what has caused harm or what bothers you, I think it's always important to focus on the harm or the issue rather than attacking the person. For me, these are things that I have used to create supportive learning spaces where people feel comfortable sharing and having challenging moments together, so there's growth. Is there anything on here that well, let me say this. Is there something missing from this list that someone wants to uplift that's helpful for a learning space? I'm mindful I can't see the chat. So Kevin, if something's in the chat, you're gonna have to share that with me.
Will do. Nothing in the chat right now.
All right. All right, folks. Well, I'll take that silence as you all being in agreement that we can move forward. This next section is going to be what I call table talk. And table talk is an opportunity for us to collectively view some slides. They're just images. And we're going to just look at the slides. I'm not going to ask you to take any notes. I just want you to look at each slide and think about, what do you see? Think about what might be taking place in that image. Think about, how do you feel? Right? So those are the three things, right? What do you see? What might be taking place? How do you feel? And once we're done with going through the slides, there's 4 slides. I'm going to ask Kevin to put us in small groups to have some dialogue, to then share, what did you see? What did you think was taking place, and what did you feel? So it looks like we have about 43 right about now. And I guess that's probably excluding like 6 or 7 people based in, the team of folks that are like coordinating this training in the background. So let's still go with about 3 people per group. Again, what do you see? What do you think is happening? How do you feel? All right, Kevin, if we can open up those breakout rooms, have folks go into those rooms and just share out with your colleagues. What did you see? What did you think was transpiring, and what did you feel? Let's give them 6 minutes in those groups. And so that means that everybody, if we're in groups of 3, everybody has 2 minutes. So I would ask that you all kind of be mindful of sharing time, and we'll go from there.
You should see a button asking you to join. So if you could please join your breakouts.
It looks like everybody's joining because the numbers are dwindling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just trying to see if anybody's left over.
Yeah, but what happened was some of us joined too early and we bounced back.
Oh,
Yeah.
trying to figure out which room. Room 3. Okay. We'll put Darnell room 3. Okay.
Darnell, you should see another invite to room 1, sir.
Oh, room 1.
Anna, I'm going to move to
Mary Lou said she joined too early.
6. I'm gonna move Anna to 6. And then Mary Lou, where she's in 5.
Nick, can you broadcast that the question I put in the chat? What do you see? What is happening? How do you feel?
Yep.
Thank you.
Anna. Oh. Oh.
Hi. Okay, good morning.
All right, so we have. Do we want to put these 3 that are here, Nick, in a group together?
I'm Rosalia. Oh, Susan's back. I've already invited most of them to a room, but I don't think they're joining.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah, I was kind of moving people around too. People
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so was I.
That's okay. Some people just like to have the screen on and listen, and then they don't always want to join the breakout sessions.
We don't have anybody that's by themselves, do we?
I move them around so that they
Yeah.
could
We
be.
have Anna in 3. I'm gonna move her to a room that to 12.
Okay, because those people are not joined. Yep, I see it.
They have about 3 minutes remaining. So if we can share that with them, that might be helpful just so they can know how to manage their time.
And Noah, you got the workshop survey from Virve this morning, correct?
I think so. Yes, I have it.
1 minute remaining. If we haven't already done so, we should close out those rooms.
They're closing out. They got about 50 seconds before they are kicked out.
Welcome back. Welcome back. I see people are transitioning back into the larger room. We'll give others a few seconds to transition back into this space.
Like his background.
Welcome back. I think we are still waiting for a few of the rooms to close out. Is that everyone? Is that all the rooms? All right, folks. So I would love to hear from the community in terms of what were some of those things that you saw in those images, what was happening, and what did you feel? I'm sure you all had some dialogue that was quite informative and thoughtful. So let me hear from a few people.
Well, I start
Hello.
with this is Darnell.
How you
I
doing,
saw
Darnell?
tension. The other ones I saw security, dependency, and love. But if I was to merge them together, it was like the roller coaster of family is security, conflict, and love. Right? So that's the merging of them all.
Yeah, good. I appreciate you sharing.
And I want to say thank you for inviting me, Kev. I met Kev at the first Friday. I'm one of the drummers.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Let me hear from two other people. Yvette, I think you had taken yourself off mute. So I don't know if that was an accident or you were getting ready to jump in before Darnell spoke.
Yeah, but the nerd took my word. So yeah, I just saw, the argument, the body language of parents when and I was thinking about, are they doing this in front of the kids? Kids and read those movements and those read the faces. And then the second one, like she loves her daddy. Daddy's working and she's right there. The security, like Darnell said, and third one was a happy family, right? Until it gets sour. But that's all. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Raina, you look like you came off of mute.
Yeah, I did. Thank you. So a lot of what folks said, except for the first one, I saw a passionate conversation.
Yeah. And why did you see something different? Like, I'm curious.
Yeah, you know, I definitely saw in the photo they were intense. There was an intensity in the posturing or the hand. I think the woman had her hands up like this, and he was kind of leaned in. And I didn't necessarily, I mean, I saw passionate conversation, you know, that was happening. They were in the middle of it. And but yeah, and I just chose not to frame it as I mean, and conflict's not a bad thing, right? But I saw passion. And yeah, so
Give thanks.
yeah.
What I would ask you all is ask yourself, why did you see what you saw? Without words, without a narrative for each photo, we see a lot and we make meaning of what we see based on our perspective, based on our value set, based on our beliefs, based on our experience. And sometimes based in, that information that we have, we can be accurate. Sometimes we might be inaccurate. But what I really want to focus on is, why did you have those thoughts? So this next portion is going to be an activity where you can have some self-reflection. And so let me share my screen. Let's get back. So our next activity is going to be a values activity. And so on the next slide, following this slide, there'll be about 30 to 40 personal values. What I would ask for you to do is to look at that list, choose from that list and pick 10 values that are most important to you, not your partner, not your family, but what's most important to you. And then I want you to rank them from most important to least important, then pick your top 3. Now, when I do the change the slide, you're going to see that value list. Maybe the values that I've provided, they don't work for you. That's fine. Choose your own 10, but you still only get 10. So you got 10 values that are most important to you. Rank them from most important to least important and pick your top 3. I'm going to give us 3 minutes to do this. Is that clear? Let me get some thumbs ups. Although I can't see the thumbs ups.
All thumbs are up.
All right, good. I'm dependent on you all to be my eyes. There we go. So I'm going to give you all 3 minutes to look at this list, identify 10 values that are most important to you, rank them from most important to least important, then pick your top 3. What I would ask is that we do this in silence, so we can have a moment to self-reflect and sit with ourselves. take another minute. What I would ask people to do is, for those that feel comfortable, drop your top 3 in the chat. If you feel comfortable, drop your top 3 values in the chat. Y'all was ready because they flowing in. You all ready to share out. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. This exercise is really an opportunity to explore our worldview. And our worldview is, how do we see the world, right? So I'm offering here 2 different definitions. One says that worldview is race specific, even though, we have educators in sociology and anthropology that says race is a social construct. We still deal with it and how it impacts people in our society. And so they say that worldview is unique to people's identity, and their experience for their racial cultural group. And that includes their DNA, their history, and their environment. So thinking about how someone's racial experience begins to shape how they see the world. The next one says one's worldview provides meaning to one's social, meaning society, cultural experience, and offers collective narratives for groups of people in society at large. What I want you to think about is, what is your worldview? So you've identified your values. Those values are very much connected to how do you see the world. So whether we're thinking about your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your religion, what generation you were born in, your career path in terms of what was your educational journey, what did you learn in that department, what was some of the pedagogies or framing that was offered to help you think about not just the concepts in that department, but also in the field that you're in right now. And so worldview becomes really important. So when you think about those images that I shared with you all, it's part of your worldview. What you saw reflects your worldview. And so those values that you have, they can change over time. I've done this, activity for a number of years, and depending on who's in the space, top 3 usually shifts. When I'm in a space and I'm doing this activity with younger people, most of the time in the top 3 is things like money or materialism, because they're in a different place in their life. There's no judgment, just a different reality. When we think about folks that I've done this with that are elders or older folk, health tends to be in the top 3. And so we see where people are at in their journey often influences their values. And so your values come from, how are you socialized? What was that family dynamic? Was that family dynamic inclusive of friends or fictive kin, those you've been known for a long time, no blood connection, but their family? You see them as family because there's an intimacy there. Now, whether you were a part of an organized religion or not, religion or tends to give you how to be. The school that you went to, whether you went to a public school, charter school, Catholic school, Islamic school, homeschooled, schooling gives you curriculum. And in that curriculum, it tells you what's important. It offers you explanations of what is right, what is wrong, how to perceive things, what texts you should engage with, the community that you've been a part of. And everyone that's on this call has been a part of multiple communities. But when you think about your socialization, what did that community look like? Was it small? Was it vast? Was it in an urban community? Was it in a rural community? Were you in a community where you knew everyone in, a block radius? Or did you grow up in a community where you didn't know your neighbor next door? All of these things in terms of community begins to develop how we think about those that we call community, those that we have relationships with, those that we depend on. The media, we got to think about the evolution of the media. It's been around in the sense of we go from radio to printed text to, I remember at one point in time, there was all of this critique of the media and how detrimental the media was. And now, because of social media, if you have a social media platform, we are all that participate a part of the media. And so when you think about your values and your socialization, that's how you get your worldview. This is how you begin to think about those images, but even going beyond those images, it also begins to inform how do you think about those parents? How do you think about the parent dynamic? How do you begin to think about, what is happening? Is there bias present? How is your bias influencing your level of engagement, your decision-making, how you show up? One of the things that I would also add is thinking about your identity. So Kimberly Crenshaw helps us to think about identity as it relates to power dynamics and our primary and secondary identities. So if you look at the inside of this wheel here of identities, it is what we consider to be primary identities. On the outside is considered to be what we know as secondary identities. Both play a role in how do we understand the things that are happening around us, our judgment, our beliefs. And so I want to offer this, that as practitioners, as those that are in service of children and families, part of how the work will unfold is you being very thoughtful about your values, your socialization. When I was in school some years ago to become a therapist, we often talked about transference and recognizing that we all have experiences, and that if we haven't spent time processing our experience, that experience will show up in those spaces where we are supposed to serve and influence how we serve. And I would add, even outside of that, that your identity influences how you serve. Your values influence how you serve. Your socialization influence how you serve. And so for me, when we talk about as service providers, how do we support families? We can't ignore who we are. We all have bias. We all have bias. Bias, by definition, is favorable and or unfavorable beliefs or ideas. And so when you're mindful of how you show up in that space, then you can be intentional and be mindful about maybe how your socialization, your experiences might be influencing how you're seeing what is taking place, what you're responding to, and how you're responding to. And so I want to normalize that we are humans, and when we're in service, we are not absent of that service. I want to offer this question, and this is not a question that I'm going to ask you to share out in the larger group. I think this is just a question for you to think about. How does your worldview contribute to or hinder your support of children and families? Because on paper, like if you look at your top 10 values, without me even looking, 95% or maybe even higher, off face value, your values seem to be good values. You might have things like spirituality or love or God or community, and those words on paper, they're favorable. The question that I will pose to you to go a little deeper beneath the face value of those values is, are your values inclusive? Meaning, are other people included when you say your values? Because maybe someone shows up oppositional. Maybe they don't have a similar value. Maybe their behavior is problematic based in your definition or your perception. The question becomes, are those values inclusive? And whether the question is yes or no is going to help you to answer this question for you. So I want to stop there and open up really quickly. Are there any questions in the chat or comments that we want to uplift for the larger group before we transition to the next section?
Nothing in the chat right now, Jason.
All right. So I want us to transition to the child. And I think for me, the work that is done between the parents is essentially about the child. I really believe in service providers having a child-centered approach. And so I want to uplift Erickson's stages of psychosocial development. And I only want to uplift it because it's not the only way to think about development of children. And it's not the only way to think about our positive or negative challenges as it relates to development. But I just want to put this here for us to think about what are some of the realities that our children could be exposed to based on what is happening in their environment. And so Erickson offers that, if you look at this chart, there is approximate age in terms of where that child is at in their development. And then on the other side, we have the psychosocial crisis where one or two things could be developed at that age. So we look at infancy to 18 months, trust or mistrust. And so what Erickson is suggesting is that based in the environment, who's present? Is it a loving environment? Is it hostile? Is there consistency? Is there validation? What is present will offer either a positive or a negative reality for that child. And as I said before, this isn't the only model. I'm offering it here for us to begin to think about what are the possibilities that our children could endure when they're experiencing the challenges of being separated from a parent or experiencing challenging co-parenting dynamics.
Jason, can I just add something real quick?
Absolutely.
All I wanted to add is I'm thankful that you gave that information. The other thing from my personal experience is you may have certain values in a household, but the child may not feel them. For me, I had a lot of love and security in our household, but I didn't feel it.
Right. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think what you're speaking to is what is offered and how it translates to that child. And I think when we understand what child-centered parenting looks like, it's not just saying that we're doing it. It's really understanding the needs of the child. It's collaborating with the child. And I would hope that as providers, you all are taking that approach too, when I say collaborate. I know that in all instances, when dealing with, family members that, might have had experiences that are challenging, it makes the job as a provider a lot more difficult. But what I would say is that there's something very powerful about collaboration, allowing someone's personal experience to be a part of how they think about parenting, how they develop their capacity to parent, how they engage with the other parent to center the child, right? So collaboration becomes extremely important. And so I wanted to highlight that there are some quote unquote normal responses. And I was intentional by putting quote unquote because I think normal is subjective. I don't really know what normal is, because you have different cultures, different backgrounds, different households. And so when you factor in the different realities that people have, normal is expansive. But what I wanted to capture was, what are some things that I've seen as a provider myself over the years, things that I've seen as being a parent, things that I've seen being in community with other parents that are dealing with the co-parenting dynamic. And so we see emotional, we see disappointment, sadness, vulnerability, self-blame, and depression. And I think of all of those emotions, there's a spectrum. They don't all look the same. And I think, unfortunately, when we say something like depression, we assume that the behavior will look one way. Sometimes depression very much doesn't look like the traditional way that we've been taught to think about depression, right? Sadness doesn't look like sadness. Sometimes children and adults alike mask their emotions behind other emotions that might have been more comfortable sharing. Here's something for us to think about. Just as you receive values from your household, from your environment to help you think about the world, you've also received, and children have received, what emotional response is most socially acceptable. Those are the areas where they see comfort. So if you always saw your parent or your father showing anger as the norm, then that becomes what you're comfortable sharing. If you always saw your parents expressing joy, even in difficult moments, or you saw them, trying to offer joy when there was challenges in between, like a parental dynamic, then you get more comfortable sharing joy, even when that moment doesn't necessarily communicate joy. So our parents, our household offers some normacy on what we feel comfortable expressing, whether it's a positive moment or challenging moment. And so I want to offer that because I think it's important that we allow for there to be a spectrum around emotions and how they might look when we're engaging with children and families. Some of the behaviors: parent blame, sleeping problems, a decline in school performance, behavioral issues, struggle with attachment, thoughts of self-harm. Once again, for me, this list is not exhaustive. There is more there. And I'm uplifting this because I think if we do normalize some of these things, then we can be proactive as providers in terms of helping parents think about when this transition is happening, whether it is a transition that is smooth, quote unquote, or challenging, how do parents be intentional to support their child? Every child will have a response. The question becomes, are they supported while they're having that response? I'll say that again. Every child will have a response. Every child will have a response. Are they supported while they're having that response? This last slide here in terms of this section is centering the child, understanding the child's needs. I think this is another opportunity for collaboration. Talk to the child. Sometimes the child is too young to speak for themselves, but when the child is old enough, listen to the child, right? And sometimes it's not as easy as asking the child, oh, okay, well, what do you want? What do you need? Sometimes it's giving them options. Sometimes it's, engaging them in activities where they can become more open, allow them to draw, allow them to play and engage with that child in a way where that child has safety with you, has comfort with you, and they're thinking about, okay, what is needed. And if you're working directly with the parents, this is an opportunity to talk to the parents. Okay, how do you not center yourself in this moment, right? You might be going through a difficult moment as a parent. You might be going through some grief. You might be going through some trauma. But how do we center the child? What do you think your child needs? Even if it's difficult, right? Even if it's difficult to say, what do you think your child needs? I think partnering with parents in that way allows for there to be greater child input, allows for the child to be centered. And it's a process because the parent, depending on where they are at, might not be able to engage in that way. But I think it's something to highlight with the parent so they understand that there's a need to do the work that's going to move them in the direction of centering the child, right? Because let's be transparent, where parents are at with the relationship is a barrier. Where parents are at with the relationship is a barrier. What do I mean by that? That's a great question. If the parents are still grieving that relationship, still have unresolved feelings around that relationship, feel unsafe around that relationship, all of those realities are barriers for them centering the child. Now, the perfect scenario, a parent is going through something and a parent is emotionally available or emotionally mature enough to say, I'm having my experience, but I want to center my child. That, in my experience, I've seen it, but it's not always the norm. And so some of what I'm articulating is where we want to get the parents to, right? Even talking about like what helps or what harms the child. Some of these conversations are a process. Maybe they can't see beyond their grief. Maybe they can't see beyond, their concerns, that they can't really identify those things. And this is where collaboration becomes important. Are you creating an environment as a provider where they can think about some of these things without judgment, right? Then maybe some of their behaviors are problematic, and so in order to send the child, there has to be a relationship built with the parent where the parent gets to show up in all their messiness and all of their imperfections, and they're still seen as valuable. They're still seen as someone that has the capacity to be present for their child. But this also goes back. How you see that parent is going to influence how you treat that parent. And this is why I took you all through that values activity, because for me, they're not separate. They're one and the same. And we often deal with this work as though people are able to not be present in themselves and come and support children and families without us bringing our perspectives, our values, our experience, our bias. And this last one says collaborate with the parents and child to identify supportive coping practices. Now, this might be a both and. This might be coping practices for them to be able to support the child, or coping practices for the child. Now, what I've learned over the years is that we all have coping skills. We all have coping skills. The question becomes, are those coping skills healthy or unhealthy? And so if we don't support parents, they're going to lean on what is available or what they feel comfortable doing. Same thing with the children. And so offering a space to explore healthy coping is a really important opportunity to center the child. Questions, comments, reflections, anything in the chat before we transition to the next section?
We had a comment
I'll say something.
from Yvette, and then you can go, Raina. Children do not do what you tell them to do. They do what they see you doing.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Raina.
Yeah, so I love all that you're talking about. And, when we're able to center the child, so one of the programs that we have here at the Family Justice Center in Solano is the supervised visitation program for families that have been impacted by interpersonal violence. And so they are really in a really tough place, these parents, right? Because it's litigious. They're fighting over custody of the child. And we have really centered all three parents, really. And we've invited parents to really begin to think about what the impact to the child is. And outside of the court process, like, what do you think your child needs right now? And how do we create a safe visitation for everyone involved? And so, but a lot of times parents aren't either so wrapped into their own stuff, right? And don't really think about, like, what does the child need right now? What does the child need in terms of being in relationship with that other parent or what have you? So I just love all that you're saying. And I think it's so important because children do have a lot to say. They have a lot of feelings. And even if they don't have a lot to say, or they haven't been provided that space or opportunity, they sure have a lot of feelings. And I just love what you said is, are they supported while they have reactions or responses, not reactions? And then what's our obligation to create those opportunities for them too. So just thank you.
Yeah. I want to offer that community becomes extremely important. And this is where some of you all may have been thoughtful about this. Maybe the organization you work with are thoughtful about this, but beyond you, there needs to be a community for those parents, and supporting those parents to identify who are those people that can support them. Because I'll share my personal experience. When my son's mother and I was transitioning, our relationship was ending. And I remember being very upset. I was bothered by some of her behaviors. I felt like she was trying to take my son away from me. And I was so in my feelings that I couldn't process her experience. And it took for me to sit with my mother, to sit with elders, to sit with people that I trusted and loved, to offer me honesty and transparency when I needed it the most. And I remember being bothered, like, why are you telling me about their experience? I remember being frustrated. And it would be the moments where I was sitting by myself, where I would think about what they were telling me. And it took me to say to myself, well, I know they love me. I know this is my community. And so I knew that I could trust them. And so it took me some time, but having those people to offer that transparent, candid dialogue to you when maybe you're not ready to hear it, it helped me. So giving people community or supporting them with identifying community becomes so important to the process, because you feel alone. You feel like no one understands your experience. I remember thinking when I would hear from women, I would think, oh, you don't know what I'm talking about. You're not in this position. You don't know what it feels like to be a man and someone trying to take your child away from you. You've been raising your child. I remember thinking that, right? And so the community piece makes it easier to receive information because you do trust them, you do have a relationship with them. And so that becomes important in this child-centered approach as well.
Jason, can I also add, when you were speaking about the coping mechanisms, are they healthy? And I think that like to your point about different cultures and different upbringings and different experiences, we're going to see different coping mechanisms as healthy or unhealthy based on our own lens. And so we have to really check ourselves with that work in terms of why folks are choosing these coping mechanisms. And even if it's not healthy, if this is the one they have, how do you support that transition to a healthier coping mechanism or mechanisms?
Absolutely. I definitely appreciate that. Because that might be all they have. That might be all they know. And you offering them something different might feel uncomfortable, might feel unfamiliar. And so that's where that collaboration piece comes in. And I'm sure you all in your organization have a wealth of resources. But I think the relationships become extremely important in terms of, do they feel trusting of you based in, when you're trying to share something, if they don't feel trusting of you, they're not going to be receptive to it, right? There has to be a relationship built, right? And that, as I spoke to, that goes back to how you've engaged, how you've experienced engaging with them, your values, your belief, your experience, all those things become important. And everybody role is a little different in terms of, like, I don't know, the roles of everybody that's on this Zoom. And so I'm not sure how much time you have to build those relationships, right? To cultivate that intimacy, that trust that's needed. But it is essential to do what we're
Jason, we got a couple comments in the chat. My ex created conflict in every turn. That makes me emotional distress to handle. Even I try my best to cope in a healthy way. My son returns back being brainwashed. That's exhausting for me. That's one comment. Another one was, I appreciate that, Jason. Part of restorative and transformative justice is to build that support system / community / pods to get the support to cope. So the child is centered. So the child is not expected to provide that for the adult. And so the adult's needs are met by their close ones, not only the organizations or systems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to go to that first. First of all, I would say my heart goes out to you because it is challenging. It is extremely challenging when you are, it sounds like, I don't know, but it sounds like you are parallel parenting. And in parallel parenting, there's separate things happen at the household. There's very little communication. It tends to be a lot of tension and hostility. And in that space, what tends to happen is very much what you shared. Parents are challenged with their emotional experience and thinking about what their child is exposed to, what is going on when that child is not, with them in their custody. And it's important to have community, because there for that emotional distress you speak of, there needs to be a space to emote, to share, to have reflection. And then there also needs to be a way in which the parent is able to create a different experience that reflects.
Jason, I got a question for you. Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Given the norm of we're not together romantically, so now, we don't get along. Because that's that is what happens. We break up romantically, and now we're enemies. And how do we get, what are some tools for parents who are going through that to kind of get to the other side where we see each other as partners, as teammates? Because a lot of the fathers that we work with, that seems to be their experience, where, you know, the relationship fractures and now it's just a battle. And how do we move beyond that when one parent is not willing, whether that's the mother or the father? What are some tips, some tools to move beyond that, to build that bridge?
Yeah, I mean, that's not a one size fit all response, right? So one of the things I would say is that what I would advocate for is being mindful of cultural dynamics. So when you are dealing with parents, you have to be mindful of their upbringing, you know, what's going on with them emotionally. You have to be thoughtful about where they at in terms of, you know, the grief of the relationship, anger of the relationship. There's a lot that they are dealing with. And I think part of that is creating a space for them to get support. So whether that's therapy, community, those things become extremely essential, because needing a space to emote, to talk about, to process becomes important. I also think this is where skill building becomes important. Are they mindful of their communication patterns? Right. So engaging folks in healthy communication, specifically nonviolent communication. I think creating a structure that they can communicate. One of the things I often tell parents is the relationship has dissolved, and until there's until they reconcile within themselves the reality of that relationship, they're going to have challenges with parenting. And that's a process. So having the community, having therapy, having, you know, supportive coping behaviors or you know, practices become extremely important. I also think them developing healthy communication, or creating up a system of communication. So one of the things I think is really important is, you know, when I was going through my dynamic with my son's mother, I feel like it was more important to put everything in email. I almost never communicated on the phone. I needed it because it allowed me to read what was being said without, and if I got angry, I was in my own space. Like, and then I could say to myself, like, okay, I'm not ready to respond to this because I know I'm going to respond with something that's not appropriate. Like, having a system that supports where someone is at becomes important. I think having those things become important. Even having, you know, what I would consider to be like mirror moments where they're able to sit with the provider or community member and they're able to say, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I want to say, and that person mirroring it back to them, where they get to say, this is what you said. How you think that's going to land? How do you think they're going to receive that? And it's a difficult moment to see yourself through, like, someone basically repeating what you said, you know, kind of mimicking your behaviors. That is a very candid, honest moment that some people struggle with, but it's needed. When you have that played back to you, it's almost like an aha moment. So let me jump into some more of these slides and get to some of these tools. So some of what I just shared is when attempting to support a parent that's having a difficult time, what I would say is, here are some things to consider. Family background, their own child rearing, their values, their parenting style, their relationship wounds or trauma, their common life stressors. We all have them. And this comes through what time is spent developing that relationship, listening to that person, allowing them to unpack who they are. That takes time, that takes patience, that takes space. But these are things to consider because these are going to influence their perception, their behaviors, their responses to that other parent. I think some of this, becomes important. I just want to uplift that, like, there's a different experience for our children when fathers are present. And I think when there is a harmful experience or a parent that is experiencing emotional challenges or that is struggling with self-control or that's exhibiting unsafe behaviors, this becomes something that's far removed from what we think about. But a parent that is in a healthy space, a parent that is willing to do the work, can offer a very emotional, physical, mental experience for their child in terms of their development. Here are what I would offer as pathways that need to be happening simultaneously for the parent, both parents, regardless of who dissolved the relationship, whether, who has, more custody, both parents need a pathway to be addressing what is happening with them. And so I've identified, and this is not an exhaustive list, but these are things that I've seen that there needs to be a pathway for them to be doing self-work that happens, as I spoke to, simultaneously. Parents need to be doing the work so they can get to that place of collaborating with that other parent, if that's possible, or simply creating an approach that is child-centered, whether it's both and or one or the other, there needs to be that work. Some of what I've seen to be helpful is helping parents to think about their decision making. I think this is often a challenge or a barrier. Like, are they conscious of the decisions that they're making and the possible outcomes of their decision making? I think of how people are dealing with their feelings, anger management. I don't really like that term, anger management. I tend to want to focus on how are people engage with themselves to understand their physiological experience. So helping people to think about what is your body communicating and how are you able to respond to your body in a way where you are able to show up in a way that is healthy for you and others around you. Thinking about conflict resolution. For me, this is often something that one would perceive to be very simple in terms of, oh, there's a conflict, there needs to be an emphasis on a solution. However, I think we have normalized that people should have said skill set, emotional maturity, conflict resolution, healthy communication styles. We have normalized that these are things that people should have. But even if you have those things and you're going through a difficult transition, it's sometimes difficult to access those things in the way in which you would if you weren't grieving, if you weren't experiencing, challenges with another person that you loved, that you had built a life with. I often tell parents when I'm working with them, is like, the relationship dissolving is one part of the grief, the dream or the thoughts or the what you created in your head is also a place of grief because you've created that reality. It's one to have the physical reality. It's also what did you have in your head? How do you see your journey with this person? So you're grieving the reality and what you've created. And that's a process. And so when you're going through that process, sometimes it's difficult to engage in something like conflict resolution. Sometimes it's difficult to listen to what that person is sharing when you feel like maybe your experience needs to be heard. But both could be of value. But it's hard when maybe that person has been unsafe. Maybe that person, you feel like is untrusting. It's hard to engage in that. And so part of what practitioners have to do is create space, role play, talk about, well if you are here, where's the ideal destination that you want to get to? What are some of the barriers to you getting to that ideal destination? I think creating space to talk about that, creating space to engage in that process becomes important. I think emotional intelligence is something that is underspoken about as it relates to how to create a parenting dynamic that's child-centered. Emotional intelligence, I think, based in how men are socialized in Western society, is something that is either underdeveloped or at times it seems to be absent. I think about the young men that I work with. When I ask them how they're doing, it's cool, fine, good, but none of those things are emotions. And so I think based on how our society like socializes women and men, those that identify with those gender identities, I think we've normalized men not emoting, and we've normalized creating space for and encourage women to emote, share, unpack. And so then when you have a situation like this, then some of what we see as people being unsafe or violence is a reflection of people being emotionally unintelligent, where they haven't practiced, well, identifying, well, how do you feel? Beyond good, cool, or fine. Some people can't differentiate between being hungry and frustrated. I think about when I would, excuse me, when I worked with children years ago as a teacher, we used to have the emotion chart, and we would say, okay, well, what emotion are you feeling? And they would have the little face and they could point to it. It's almost like in certain cases, we have to share and allow people to practice like identifying how they feel. And so it becomes a normal reality, because if you can't articulate how you feel or you can identify how do you feel, it's hard to engage in conflict resolution. It's hard to communicate. If you're struggling to identify, well, how do I feel in this moment, or you don't feel like there's space for you to articulate or share, that's a very dark space, a very dangerous space. And I think that's work that I don't know is happening enough, whether I've been in locked facilities or whether I've been, in community-based organizations and I'm working with young men or I'm working with young fathers. This is an area where we spend a lot of time unpacking because it hasn't been normal. It hasn't been normal for them to think about, how do I feel and how do I articulate it? And is it safe for me to share that I feel sad without there being a social shaming of, you know, them sharing that they feel sad or they feel helpless.
Hey,
Myra?
Jason, we have a hand up. Is this a good time?
Yes, Myra.
Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to share something real quick. I am a mother of 4, and we were going through a separation, me and my ex-spouse, and my oldest was having trouble saying her emotions. It would always be like, I don't know. The therapist told me to print out the emotions. So all my 4 kids have their own emotions printed out, draw it out, and we would do check-ins at least like 10 minutes to 30 minutes just to express what they needed or how they felt. And I feel like I found that really useful. And I've noticed that my oldest was able to say like, hey mom, I feel really mad because X, Y, and Z. And I just wanted to point that out. It's just something
Yeah.
that I did with my children, and I noticed a change.
Give thanks. I appreciate you sharing that. I think it just goes to what do our young people, what do our parents have access to? And I think what you offered, you know, your children was options to explore what is going on with them and normalized it. And in normalizing it, it became a practice. And I think if you haven't done this as an adult, imagine how challenging that might be. As I spoke to earlier, remember when I spoke to what we see in the home from our parents as being emotions that are acceptable to share, that influences how we share or what we share in terms of emotions. So I think that becomes important. I think engaging parents in practices of nonviolent communication. This is a strategy of listening. This is a strategy of being able to listen, practice, thinking about what that person said, what that person needs, and what is our possible role in what that person is communicating. This often is a process because a lot of us and we haven't been socialized to communicate in a way to think about what someone's communicating, what they need, what does it mean in terms of how we show up. Some of us have been socialized to listen and respond based in like, I'm just waiting for them to get done so I could talk. Or there becomes, you know, because in a situation when we're thinking about parenting dynamics, there becomes a clash of, I want you to hear what I have to say. And there isn't a space to share the platform. There isn't a space to want to listen and understand what that person is saying. And so one of the things that I often say is that there has to be space, classes, opportunities to practice nonviolent communication. And here is just like an example, was like clearly expressing how I am without blaming or criticizing. This is where we get the compassion, right? Receiving, right? You are, you know, without hearing blame or criticism. I think sometimes we are responding to us as being the problem. Maybe even how the other parent is framing it, they are saying we're the problem. And I think it's hard to build an approach to parent together when people hear blame or criticism. And so we would hope that both parents are mature enough or prepared enough to engage in this form of communication. But we know that's not always the case. So what I've worked on with a lot of the young men, the young fathers, is that even if someone is blaming or someone is criticizing, then how do you hear what the need is without personalizing the blame or the criticism? And that's a practice, right? Because in an ideal situation, both parents have worked on, you know, being able to state what they need without blaming or criticizing, or state what the issue is without blaming or criticizing. But when that's not present, how do we still use this as a tool to support parents with being able to think about what are they saying that's going to be helpful for us to be on the same page around working to be better parents, right? Rather than thinking about this person is attacking me. It might be true. It might be. I've told them it might be. They might be attacking you, but what does it have to do with you engaging with your child at the highest level? That might be true, right? They might be criticizing you. They might be blaming you, right? And so here's just some steps that I always go over. Is like, what do you see? What do you hear? Without judgment, right? When they're saying these things, like, what are you feeling? Right? This works on emotional maturity again, you know, being consistent in that. Like, what are you feeling? Right? What is that emotion? Right? Like when they're blaming or critiquing, what is the need? Right? Is there a need not being met? Is there a way that you could show up differently for the child? Right? Rather than hearing that you aren't a good parent, like, how do you show up and say, yes, I can hear what they're saying. I want to make sure that my child needs are being met. And I'm articulating this, but this is work. I've worked with certain fathers for years for them to have aha moments. But I've always centered the child. One of the things that I've done is have my parents bring in a picture, and we put a picture on a piece of paper, and all of our work is on that piece of paper, and we're always looking at that child. And it's a way, this is a practice that I've used, like, how are we always centering the child? So no matter what we're saying, we're like, is this in the best interest of this beautiful child here? And it's like it's a tool to remind them. And it's a practice. It's difficult. We're not talking about something that is easy, but parents that are committed and parents that are thoughtful about that child, they're willing to roll up those sleeves, so to speak, and do that work, right? One of the things that I think is not spoken about enough is the realities of co-parenting and parallel parenting. We kind of use co-parenting as this blanket verbiage where we're saying, oh, people are co-parenting. And what we often see in difficult moments is parallel parenting. We usually see two parents in different homes with different practices, different expectations of the child. And that is challenging for a child to navigate. It's like, at mom house, I could do this. At dad house, I could do this. And as difficult as it is for parents that aren't able to communicate and center the child in their communication and in their approach to parenting, parallel parenting might be the best. It might be the best option in terms of them being able to create a structure and consistency for their child when the child is with them. And, you know, I think, yeah, it makes sense for, you know, the child to have consistency at like bedtime, or consistency with both parents being present at, you know, doctor's appointments or dental appointments, but, you know, or, you know, back to school night. Sometimes that's not a reality. And so it becomes a part of the dialogue in parallel parenting, that when the child is with said parent and this is scheduled, that this is the parent that's going, and this parent communicates possibly via email or via text, where it's all written out and there's a record of it, like, this is what I did, this is what was said from the doctor or from the teacher. And this isn't always easiest, but for parents that can't communicate, or for parents that have a lot of unresolved relationship dynamics, this becomes the best way. And I think we want to see a collaborative approach where parents are talking, parents are centering the child and thinking about, well, this is what we should do around bedtime, or this is what we should do around spiritual religious practices, this is what we should do around, you know, schooling. Yeah, those are ideal realities, but it's not always present, right? So, with co-parenting, you might have child where they're clear that there's, you know, no sleepovers, and because maybe you're concerned about your child being in someone's home, and parents have different thoughts around what children should be able to do. And so there's no judgment around that, but co-parenting looks very much like two parents collaborating on what the child should have autonomy to do and what their life is going to look like. And in parallel parenting, it's separate. And I think with it being separate, I think in working with those parents, I think there always has to be a conversation around what is working best for the child in terms of health around social, emotional, mental, like those become real conversations. Like, how is said practice impacting the child? Going back to the previous slides when I talked about possible, things that support the child or possible harms. And so these are just some examples, but I think it becomes important for parents to think about that. Even having conversations with parents about what is the ideal situation. What is the ways in which you think you can get there? What are the challenges, right? I've also seen parents start off at parallel parenting, and through healing, those parents doing self-care, those parents having a community, those parents accessing, wellness support. You see over time, as parents are doing that self-work, they're able to show up differently for their child, and they transition into co-parenting.
Jason, I got a quick question. Maybe it's not quick, but what are some concrete strategies, activities, or practices that parent A can do, or when parent B is resistant, angry, combative? What are some things that we can coach our parents to do to kind of lower the temperature and move closer to in the direction of just, being civil?
Respond to the need, not to the behavior. So I think we have to coach parents to respond to the need. So if the need is to pick up the child at a certain time, and it comes with all of this, this verbiage that is attacking, that is problematic, focus on that. Don't respond. This is where, as I spoke to earlier, that's where the community comes in. Process with your community. Process how that made you feel with your community. Articulate how upset you was, articulate how you feel like it's problematic, it's bothersome. Do that with your community. Don't do that with that parent. It's almost like, and this is what I've learned, and this is what I've shared, it becomes very much like a business relationship. You address what is on the table. So if it's around picking up the child, you'll never pick up the child, you always late, so the child needs picked up at 3:00. Okay, thank you. Address the need of the child. And I think, of course, that is a practice where someone has to be thoughtful that I want to respond. Usually this is how I would respond. I would go here. But there has to be an emphasis and a new practice that share that with your community. And if they're bothered, why are you bothered? Why are you bothered? Have you been late before? Right? Like you have to have honest dialogue, but that goes back to the relationship piece, right? Because maybe you've been late, maybe you have missed things, but you're trying to do better and it doesn't feel good. I don't think it feels good for anybody to have something reflected back to them that feels disparaging, that feels like blaming or shaming. And so what it takes is for there to be a space to say, yeah, how do you feel about that? Right? But if you're responding to the need, then you get to take all that out of how you would typically respond. Because what I've seen and what I've experienced is that when you respond to what they're bringing up for you, your triggers, you're not addressing the need. And that's the problem. that need is still not being met, and it's causing more issues, right? But if you have a space where you get to emote and process, it might actually be, for some people it makes them feel better, for some people it doesn't, but at least they had an opportunity to process. At least they know they have consistent community, right? So I think that's part of it, is dealing with that reality, right?
And how do you practice that with your parents that you're working with? How do you provide space so that they can actually practice that?
I think it's scenario-based activities. I think some of the stuff is like common stuff. It's like, okay, and when a child's at a certain age, it's like issues around child diet, maybe it's religion, maybe it's school, maybe it's, child support, whatever these things is. It's like, look at, some of these tips I got here, right? Acceptance, like practice acceptance. You can't control everything. You can't control what the other person is going to say or do, right? So I always tell people, let go of trying to be right. Let go of trying to prove something. Let go of, the response you would typically offer because you want to, engage in a conversation where you're proving to them or you proving them wrong. It's like, you can't necessarily dictate how they're going to think about how you're showing up. So only thing you can do is be accountable for your behaviors. You can't be accountable for how they perceive your behaviors, right? I have minimal interaction. Like if there is a drop-off place, I remember there's a time period where in the dynamic between my son's mom and I, we could not necessarily talk. We could not be in the same space. And the safe place for our child was school. So our child got dropped off at school. We picked up our child from school. So we never had to see each other. We never had to be in communication around that. But it was something we both agreed on, and it was easy and it was consistent, right? So that minimal interaction is literally, it's a healthy tool. It's like, I'm good. Like, because once again, whether it's people not feeling safe or unresolved issues around the relationship, when those feelings are still very much present, when someone's grieving, when someone's in denial, when someone hasn't accepted the reality of that relationship, it makes it very hard to engage with that person.
Yeah.
There's a hand.
Dalia, you got a question? I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Hi, my name is Dahlia, and I am a case manager with Hope Solutions, and I case manage about 11 families. And, going back to what was said, probably a beginning of our discussion that, all families are different, and everybody's perceptions of how I behave and what I say as a case manager is never the same. So how I like to approach conflict or crisis management and allowing a safe space for my parents to have a respectful discussion is getting to know what the struggle is that they're going through. That's number one for me. And the second is anticipating what may happen, looking at the situation from as many angles as I can, and start a conversation with each parent. And I'm talking about a two-parent household that live together. Okay. And so having a separate discussion with each of them and trying to get to every single angle that they might be thinking about, and just getting their getting their ideas and listening to what they think may happen. And if this happens, how are you going to respond? I say all that to say this: emotional regulation the regulation of emotions is primary, because when things are getting very heightened, you know, the tone, the voice tones start elevating, you know, the eyes starting to dart back and forth in anxiety or whatever. You know, it's very hard for some people to regulate those emotions and not make decisions based on those emotions, because whatever they're feeling, they're going to spit it out. So helping to regulate those emotions by having a discussion prior to it escalating, because I can tell when things might start to escalate. That's when I stop. That's when I say, hold on, let's have a conversation. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are you foreseeing? And what do you want to get out of it? But you gotta, in my case, I have to acknowledge what they say they're feeling and thinking before trying to direct them into having a constructive conversation and setting an example for those kids, because those kids are watching.
Yeah.
And so that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Can I ask you a follow-up question? How do you build those relationships with those parents?
Very carefully. And what I mean by that is that I try to place myself in their situation. How would I like to be approached? How would I like to be looked at? Some people prefer, eye to eye contact, others don't. I prefer eye to eye contact, but I have to notice what their behaviors are like, and I have to mirror them. And when I'm able to mirror their behavior and their tone of voice when they're speaking with me, that's when the trust starts to be built. And I've been with my families 5 years now. And so I'm at a place where they can just call me and say, hey, this is happening. This is happening. What can I do? What do you suggest? I have to make them part of the solution. Because even though I may have a solution for them, they might not want to go that route. So I have to make them part of the solution. I have to make them think, right? That's my approach.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I just want to reflect back with some of the things I heard you say. So I heard you say that you're thoughtful about that all families are different, right? I heard you say that it takes time. I heard you say that you're thoughtful about, their background. I heard you offer that you're listening. I heard that you talked about collaboration. I heard you talk about their emotional experience. And I think all those things, I'm just sharing those things out loud because these are things that's been mentioned. And I think sometimes it almost feels very much like, oh, just do this. But it is a simple thing, but it's work. It's work. And, I'm not sure what everybody's caseload is, because I think you said you had 11.
11 families, and each family has between 1 child to 6 children.
That's a lot of work. That's why
Yes, sir.
That's a lot of work.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to thank you for the work that you are doing, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Those practices that you uplifted, that's what we've been talking about. This is the work. And I think there has to be a level of commitment to seeing the humanity of our families. I don't think we could say that lightly. I think we have to see the humanity of our families. I think in the systems we work in, sometimes our fathers are not seen in a way that is humanizing.
Right.
Sometimes
And may I please add something? Forgive me for interrupting you, but I can forget. I love my job. I love what I do. I love my families. I've been in social services for over 25 years. But the key to having a successful relationship with our clients, in my opinion, begins with proper self-care. I would have been burnt out by now. I would have had an early retirement already. Self-care is so important because it serves 3 purposes. 1, it keeps us sane. And second, it keeps us grounded. And third, and most important for me, it sets an example of
Yes.
how our families, our adults have to take care of themselves so they can pass on positive habits to their children, so they can be leaders in their own families, because these people are the only thing that children look up to and follow. And I heard earlier, it's do what I say, not what I do. Double standards would lessen if we can help set that example.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, your experience, your wisdom. Give thanks. I want to go to this last slide. I'm mindful of time. We're at 11:50, and I just want to share this last slide with you all. There's more slides, and because there are more slides, when I send out the slides, you will have access to all these slides, even the ones we haven't gone over. And the hope is that there are some tools that are helpful, and so I'll make sure that I guess I'll send it to Kevin, and from there to get blasted out. But let me share this last slide. I want to end here on this slide where it says the 4 S's of conscious parenting. And I think one of the things that we can do as service providers, practitioners, advocates, I think, is being mindful of the various practices, tools, or strategies we can give our parents, because our parents come from different communities, different backgrounds, because our parents are in different places as they are engaged in this process of developing their children, creating safe environments for our children. Some of our parents are learning to be parents. I think offering them various practices, I think, that becomes extremely helpful, because what works for one doesn't work for all. And so one of the things I often think about is when I'm sharing with parents, the approach to creating child-centered parenting, like, what does safety look like? What does safety look like for that child? And it could be a combination in terms of physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual, or maybe it's just, maybe the immediate need is physical. But I think this is an opportunity to engage them in dialogue. And I think also what I would offer, and I heard this, is collaboration. Like, how are we collaborating where they can articulate that? This is also an opportunity, depending on the age of working with a child. What does a child feel like safety looks like for them? If they're mature enough to articulate what that is, that voice becomes important. And it's a way to model with the parents what collaboration looks like. I think everyone has different parenting styles. Some of us come from parenting styles where it's very much this top-down approach. I'm not critiquing it. I'm just mindful that all parents don't engage with their children in terms of their development in that manner. Some parents are more thoughtful about including the child's voice. What does the child feel? What does the child need? And so thinking about being safe, thinking about, what does it mean to feel secure? Maybe the child is able to articulate, maybe they're able to, identify certain things that can happen in their home, in their community, where they feel most safe, where they feel most secure. For me, this becomes really important, because when this transition happens, and most often than not, it's triggering for that child. That child is going through a lot of, emotions. This child is trying to figure out, what does this mean for them? Sometimes they're going into a space of blaming a parent being able to collaborate with a provider or collaborate with the provider and their child and talk about these things, explore some of the realities of what safety feels like, looks like, where those places becomes extremely transformative for that child and transformative for that parent, allowing those parents to see the beauty, the power of their child being able to articulate what they need and what is best for them. These last two is like the seen and soothe, right? Being attuned to your child's feelings. This is something that gets left off the table when parents are going through their own journey of trying to establish the parenting norms, whether they're trying to establish a parenting norm where they are collaborating or it is separate. It's still a process. Sometimes in that process, a child's feelings aren't at the forefront. And so part of the job of the provider is to bring that child in spaces. Even when that child is not present, simply saying, do you think this works for your child? How will your child respond to this? Will your child be receptive? How have you seen your child respond to something like this in the past? Will this be familiar? Is this unfamiliar? Those prompts, those questions where parents have to have a moment of reflection becomes extremely important, because now the parent, when they weren't, gets to think about the child and the child's needs. The more that we can create space for the parents to think about the child and integrate the child in their decision making and thinking, it will become a normal practice. So the more opportunities that we present to think about the child in the decision making, in the parenting, it becomes normal. It will become something that the parent will, they'll be thinking about their child, and become more like a second nature practice. But it has to be space created for that. I see that we are at 11:56. And so there are about 6 or 7 more slides that I did not get to, and I shared with Kevin and others that we would not get through all the slides. But I want to, open up the floor for any comments, reflections, and I think Noah just dropped a survey in the chat for you all.
I appreciate the class. I want to just read something before you close out. I'm a parenting coach with an organization called Center Force. We work in Alameda County and Contra Costa County. And this statement is from a young lady named Jasmine Renee Ivy. And it says, your child is not annoying, you're just annoyed. Your child is not making you mad, you're just triggered by their behavior. Your child is not spoiled, they need more consistent boundaries from you. Your child is not crying for no reason, you're just lacking empathy in the moment. Disciplining kids begins with disciplining our own thoughts and perceptions. When you let your emotions control your actions, that is a lack of discipline in itself. Don't discipline based on your patience level. Discipline based on what skills your child is lacking in the moment. When you master the art of perception, parenting is much less triggering. Thank you for letting me read that.
All right. We want to thanks Jason for being with us today. Our next training is Dads Do Things Different, and that's okay. Sean Bryant will be our trainer for the next session. Keep an eye out for a flyer and the link to register. Really quick, Noah, can you drop the link to the registration and also the flyer for the summit? For those of you who are nearby, we've got our Alameda County Fathers Corps Fatherhood Summit, which will take place on October 21st. That's a Saturday. It's open to all fathers, father figures, and allies and families, and it's open to everyone. It's a free event. Jason will be presenting there as well. We've got some amazing keynote main stage speakers and Jerry Teo, Shaka St. Gore, and Ashanti Branch. We're offering over 30 workshops. It also will include a job fair. Again, we will share the outreach materials with you. Please share with your clients, and if you can make it, hopefully you can attend. Again, this is a free event, and the summit is really meant to celebrate, acknowledge, and honor fathers and the role that they play with their families and communities. So please keep an eye out for that, and hopefully you can join us on Saturday, October 21st for the summit.
So Kev, I just put my email in the chat just in case you needed. I heard you needed some African drummers. So if that conversation still needs to be had, just email me with that email.
We'll do that. Noah, can you grab that for me, please, so we can make sure we follow up with Darnell? Sasan, you have anything you want to add?
Real quick,
Okay,
Darnell.
go ahead, Jason.
Real quick, Darnell, people in the chat were asking who was the author of the piece that you shared. If you could drop that in the chat, that might be helpful.
Okay.
No, it's 12 o'clock. I just want to thank everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Jason. It is nice to meet you. And you certainly made me think a lot about the work that we must do, and also how really difficult this work is. You know, like we have so many responsibilities and tasks to complete, deadlines to meet, and then we need to slow down, think about our own values and our biases, and then think about our clients and where they come from. It's a lot of work, but I still want to go back to my earlier message. Let's find some fun and joy. Let's not too critical and harsh of ourselves. And let's have some self-love and self-care, and have a good Friday afternoon, and have a good weekend to you all. And I hope to see all of you back here in October when we have another workshop on dads do things different. So thank you. And thanks
please complete the survey, you guys. We have not done a good job of getting survey responses. So please complete the survey and share the flyer for the summit.
Just want to say thank you, everyone, for this great opportunity, Mr. Jason and everyone, for sharing that information as a parent and community member. It's very important to be acknowledged and learner, because we are a team, we are a community, and this is very valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Petronila. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend.